Okay, we're coming up on time here, and so I'm going to take time to introduce our first speaker. Today, we are going to be dealing with Phil Rozeboom. Phil is going to talk about our insecticide area. Phil has been with SDSU as the IPM coordinator since 2018. He has his BS and Masters in entomology from SDSU and has been a real light to join our pest team here at SDSU, and always very good nature and ready to help out whenever needed. You may have figured you were going to see Adam Varenhorst this morning. Well, just like you can get double booked on meetings in the old days, Adam got double booked on Zooms this morning. And so Phil is going to be presenting to us this morning. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Paul.
If you want to load up your presentation, Phil, and get us going, I will let you go from there.
All righty. All right. Hopefully all of you can see everything. Looks good. All right. Well, like Paul said, Adam had a scheduling conflict, so he's the state entomologist based out of Brookings, South Dakota, and I'm as well as the SDSU Extension IPM coordinator. I'm his field technician as well. So of course, when he has a scheduling conflict, you know, he falls on me to cover for him. So with this presentation, what we're covering, we won't be covering insecticides per se, as Paul said, but more what insects you should be looking for in corn. There's quite a few, so I'll have to go pretty quick to get them all fit in a half hour. Whenever down in the bottom there's Adam Varenhorst, but there's also Bradley McManus. He's the technician to Billy Fuller, and those two have been doing corn insect research for quite a few years, decades. So he had a lot of input that he gave to us for this presentation. So we have, moving on to the presentation, we have three major groups of insects that are your primary pests of corn. The first group will be Coleoptera, that's your beetles. The next group will be Hemiptera, your true insects. And then the last group we'll cover today will be our Lepidoptera, your moth. So the first insect that we really recommend to watch in your cornfield this coming year is your corn rootworm. And as you see here, there are three different types of corn rootworm, three different species of rootworm that are prominent in our area. They're the western corn rootworm, the northern corn rootworm, and the southern corn rootworm. The damage of these corn rootworms, I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with it. Newly hatched larvae feed on root hairs in the outer root tissues, but also tunnel into soft root tissue. So as you can see in the middle and far right picture, you can see where almost all the root hairs are removed. Larger larvae tunnel into roots and occasionally into the plant crown. Tunnel openings are visible on the roots, and root tips appear brown and chewed back. And then severe root pruning may result in lodged plants. So that picture in the top left there, if you've ever seen that, it's a very good chance that it is your corn rootworm that caused that damage. So damaged larvae, they feed on the roots. Again, the symptoms of larval feeding are holes through the base of the small plants and tillering that follows growing point injury and root injury. So if you haven't gone out to your field to look, and it looks fine, and all of a sudden you have that cord laid over, it's most likely that corn rootworm damage. Adults, in most cases, aren't a problem throughout the growing season, but if you did have enough larvae down in your roots, you can have a severe outbreak of the adults. The beetles will feed on the foliage, the pollen, the silks, and the developing kernels of your corn plant. And then severe silk feeding can result in the loss of a few kernels to almost completely barren ear. And again, that doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So make sure, you just check your field every once in a while and look for that. The economic threshold, so when you should start thinking about applying an insecticide or some type of control measure, there isn't a threshold established, but in general, there are if you have 2 to 3 rootworm larvae down in the roots of your corn plant on average, we recommend that you apply some type of treatment. So our first corn rootworm species that we cover, this is the one that is most prevalent in our area, the one that causes the most issues. The female deposits eggs into the soil in midsummer into autumn, and then those eggs, they overwinter in your soil. They hatch based on the soil temperature. So in spring, once you reach a certain temp, they will emerge out of the soil and start feeding on those roots. Generally, and this is from Brad, he's been working with corn rootworms for decades now. Generally, the eggs hatch from late May to early June. So from May 16th to June 13th is when you'll see them. According to Brad, the most emergence, the heaviest emergence is around May 22nd to May 29th. So through that time, watch your fields carefully, because that's when you'll have the strongest emergence of those western corn rootworms. The larvae, for identification, they're creamy white, slender with reddish brown heads and a dark plate on the top side of the tail end. So each end, here's that dark plate in that left picture. On the left side, that's the dark plate. On the right side is the head plate. There's 3 development stages or instars. That's the growth of your larva. So the first instar is really tiny. The third instar is larger. The third instar has a length of about a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters when fully developed. And that is your most damaging stage. That's when they eat the most roots, because they're large. In that threshold I mentioned earlier, the 2 to 3 larvae, in most cases, even when you do dig a root up and look for it, it will be really hard to see them or find them, because as that middle picture shows, that first instar, they are quite tiny. So once those larvae eat enough roots, fill themselves, they will pupate and emerge as adults, usually in mid-July. So you can see that bottom middle picture, that's what a pupal looks like in your soil. The western corn rootworm, the male and female do look slightly different. The adults are about a 1/4 inch, 4 to 6 millimeters long. The male usually have a broad dark band across the wing cover. So if you look in that top left picture, you can see where it's almost entirely black with a yellow margin on the edges there. The female, and these are the ones you probably see the most out in the field, they tend to have black stripe on the wing coverings, as seen in that middle picture, and they have slightly longer abdomens than the male. It doesn't matter if you see males or females, it's the larva that causes damage, but if they look different and they confuse you, they are the same species. The next one, your northern corn rootworm, the larvae kind of look just like your western corn rootworm. They're creamy white, slender with a reddish brown heads and a dark plate on the top side of the tail end. Just like the western corn rootworm, there's 3 development stages in the larva. The length is the same at a 1/2 inch, and again, the third instar is your most damaging. And then also they pupate and emerge as adults, usually in mid-July, just like the western corn rootworm. The difference is the adults, when they're newly emerged, they usually tan to pale green, but as they get older and eat, corn, they gradually color change from light in color to greener with age. So basically you are what you eat at that point. Green corn plant, green insect. And then the female, again, has slightly longer abdomen than the males. The last corn rootworm, your southern corn rootworm, seen in the picture to the right there, there's 12 dark spots on their yellow or yellowish green wing covers. They have a black head, legs, and antenna. And then these guys, you'll notice out in the field that they're slightly larger than your western and northern corn rootworms. Usually your northern corn rootworms are your smallest one. They're pretty tiny green beetles. And this one is different. Instead of overwintering as eggs in the soil, like your northern and western corn rootworm. The southern corn rootworm overwinters as adults south of Nebraska and Iowa. And these guys, you might see them out in your field, the adults, but in most cases, they don't cause any economic injury in South Dakota. So the larvae, they look pretty similar to your other two rootworm species. They are greenish yellow color as they mature, the larvae, and then they mature brownish head and dorsal shield on the 9th abdominal segment. Again, that's that, just like the other two corn rootworm, they're pretty indistinguishable. So that's your corn rootworm. Your next beetle is your white grub. And here's a picture of the white grub larva with the characteristic C shape. So white grubs, at least in this area, are the immature forms of June beetles. I'm sure you guys know what a June beetle looks and sounds like. The grubs are white with brown heads, as you can see that little picture in the very bottom there, and have 6 prominent legs. You can kind of see that there. The bodies are almost always in that typical curved into the C shape. And then white grubs are occasional pests in corn seedlings. Cornfields with white grub injury were commonly in sod or some other cover crop in set aside. So white grub damage, the larvae spend spring and summer for the next 3 years feeding on plant roots near the soil surface. So with white grub, if you have a problem, you might want to work that topsoil because they do stay in that soil for 3 years. As you can see in that picture to the right, it can cause, severe stand issues if they eat enough of your corn roots or seedlings. Adult beetles emerge in the spring from the soil at dusk. They feed on the leaves of trees, with cottonwoods and willow being their favorites. So the adults, pose no problem for us. It is the larva that causes that damage. The threshold for white grub generally is 1 white grub per square foot of soil. Again, you can try looking for that threshold, but it's very takes a lot of time, to check a square foot or multiple square feet in your field. And in most cases, even if they are there, you might not find any. So I said around here, it's loosely the June beetle, but white grubs, there are multiple different species of beetles that hire their larval form is a white grub. Some other ones other than June beetle are black turfgrass, Atanus, green June beetle, Oriental beetle, Japanese beetle, and European chafer. Again, you really don't have to worry about them too much. It's typically just the June beetle. The Japanese beetle, they are in our area, just not at very large numbers. In that case, the Japanese beetle, the adult stage, does pretty much eat anything, any type of plant. So we'll have to keep an eye out for those in the coming years. The European chafer looks a lot like your June beetle and causes the same dampening off in a corn stand that the June beetle would. Our next beetle is your wireworm. So here's a picture of wireworm adult. I grew up knowing them as a click beetle because they can snap their head, they fly up in the air and they create a loud clicking sound. So that's why I grew up knowing them as. The wireworms are soil-dwelling larvae of click beetles. They are slender, elongate, yellowish to brown with smooth tusk skin and a flat cylindrical body. So as you can see in the middle picture there. And just like the June beetle, they do remain in your soil for an extended amount of time. In the case of the wireworm, it's 1 to more than 3 years, depending on species and if there is a food supply available to them. Wireworm damage, they feed on seeds and root portions of a wide variety of plants, and they can destroy germinating seeds and tiny seedlings in corn. And kind of like the white grub, I didn't mention it then, but they're often found near damaged or missing seed or plant. And with these guys, there is no threshold. So if you do have white grubs or wireworms, you might want to think about applying a soil insecticide or using a seed treatment. With a lot of these insects, you can control them using like a BT hybrid corn or a soil insecticide before the season begins. So that's pretty much it for our beetles. The one and only Hemiptera, so that's your true bugs that we cover that to keep an eye out for is corn leaf aphid. They're blue-green to gray, soft-bodied and rectangular shaped. So in the bottom picture, you can see the wingless form of them. The cornicles, which are, if you, in that bottom picture, that largest aphid there, towards the back, it has two little tailpipes, basically, dark tailpipes. Those are called cornicles, and they're surrounded by a dark basal area. So this aphid appears a little bit different from other aphids because it has that dark coloring. A lot of your other aphids will be a little lighter in green and won't have those dark markings. The aphids, they have a piercing sucking mouth part, so they pierce the epidermis of your corn plant and they suck that phloem out. Once they suck that phloem out, droplets of honeydew are expelled through those cornicles, those tailpipes there, and they deposited on leaves or tassel, leaving plant surfaces covered with honeydew and black sooty appearance. The adults may or may not have wings. Usually you don't see the winged morph of the aphid until you have too many on a plant. They can sense that it's overpopulated, so they'll form wings and fly to another plant. That or early in the spring when you have your first adults coming out, they'll also be winged. As seen in that picture, younger aphids are just smaller than your older ones, than adults. So host plants of the cornleaf aphids, they have a lot. Many common grass weeds like barnyard grass, crabgrass, and foxtail. So if you do have a cornleaf problem or cornleaf aphid problem, you might want to do burn down of your ditch, or when you're scouting, always check the margin of your cornfield, because that'll be, in most cases, that'll be where they'll be found first, because they come off, those ditch grasses. And they also feed on most of your cereal crops, so corn, barley, rye, oats, wheat, sorghum, and millet. So with the cornleaf aphid, in most cases, they aren't a problem, economic injurious insect, so there's no threshold for them. But the reason we mention them is because if you do have enough of them, they can excrete enough honeydew, which is very sticky, that can prevent pollen shed and possibly stunt your plants. But then the major thing we mention them is they are a vector of the maize dwarf mosaic virus. Normally, a green peach aphid spreads it more, but just keep that in mind. If you have cornleaf aphids, just a few in your field, and they're not causing economic injury, they still could be vectoring that maize dwarf mosaic virus. Maybe Emmanuel will be covering that in his presentation. So our last group of insects, Lepidoptera, your moths and butterflies, but all of these are moths for this presentation. Your first one to look out for is your European corn borer. So here's a picture of all the life stages here. They have egg, larva, pupa, adult. With the European corn borer, the one you want to look out for most is the larva. So identification, the female and male are different. The female moth, as the one on the left there, has a thicker body, a pale yellowish brown to light tan wings. And then the male moth is usually smaller, slender body, and tan to brown, and then darker than female. And I'll just say now, a lot of these Lepidoptera, these moths in your corn, look a lot alike. So if you're out in the field and you're not sure, what you got, try to catch one, and you can send it to Adam, or take a picture and send it to Adam, and he should be able to identify them. But it is difficult because a lot of these moths, for a lot of these caterpillar pests in corn, do look very similar. So the larvae of the European corn borer, the larvae are dirty white, often having a pinkish tinge with smooth skin and numerous rows of dark spots running the length of its body. So as you can see in the top left picture, they do have color phases, so they can be really dark brown all the way to that bottom right one that's quite a bit lighter. But they will have very smooth skin, and there will be dark spots throughout its whole body. And then that picture on the right does show kind of that pinkish hue there. So European corn borer, I mentioned the larval instars earlier with some of the beetles. The corn borer is unique in that or somewhat unique in that the instars, they all cause damage, but it differs, mainly because their size, is different. So the first instar larva, so that tiny little one on the far left in that picture there, they'll feed on the whorl and leaves at the center of the plant. They'll be almost completely white with a dark head, and they're very tiny, approximately 1/16 of an inch long. The second instar larva, they create larger holes in the whorl and leaves than the first instar larva, mainly because they're just bigger and they have bigger mouth parts. The third instar, they'll feed on the outside of the stalk before boring in and creating cavities. So that's the instar that will start, earning its namesake, boring into your corn. That fourth instar, they only feed inside the stalk, staying within that plant. The fifth instar, the length is approximately about 1 inch. They only feed in the stalk. Their color is grayer with brown spots, outline in black on each body segment, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, they create larger holes in the whorl and leaves because they are larger. So some form of scouting, if you want to know if you have your European corn borer out in your cornfield, you can walk through and look at just the leaves of your corn plant, and you should be able to find these small little egg sacs. Down in the bottom right is a reference for how small they can be. So there's a picture of a dime. But they are, despite this size, they are somewhat easy to see because, a smooth corn plant, they contrast against that pretty clearly. So damage from the corn borer. In maize, the first instar, feeding first, occurs in the whorl. Shot holes are visible when the leaf unfurls from the whorl. So what that looks like, there is a picture later on in the presentation. They only chew one hole through that whorl, but when the leaves unfurl, you get a line of holes. It kind of looks like, like shotgun BBs went through. So if you see that, you had a European corn borer in your field at some point, and you probably still do. Later, the larvae bore down midribs of leaves into the stalk. When you're scouting for them in later in the season, frass and silk will be near the entrance of holes, and that's a very good indication that you have the larva. So in that top picture, you can kind of see the hole that it made, and then that powdery residue around that hole, that's their frass. That's basically their excrement. The general threshold for European corn borer is 2 to 3 caterpillars per 25 plants. So when you're scouting for them, just go out, look at 25 plants kind of randomly throughout. And if you average 2 to 3 caterpillars with those 25 plants, management is recommended. So your next one is your corn earworm. Here's a picture of the larva and adult. The adults are most active during evening and night and are most abundant during August and September. So, you might not have to, you won't see the adults out in your field until then. Adults range from olive green to tan with dark reddish brown in color. So if you look at the adult in the bottom right, it looks very similar than your European corn borer. So like I said, they all kind of look the same. Larvae are greenish with black heads and conspicuous black hairs on the body. So unlike the European corn borer, they do have hairs. They're still smooth, but the European corn borer doesn't have as many hairs on it. And then you can see that greenish one in the middle and the more brownish colored one on the left. So they will vary in color. Your larvae will. Damage caused by the corn earworm. The larvae feed on leaves, tassels, the whorl, and within ears, but the ears are preferred sites for corn earworm attack, hence, its namesake. The young larvae feed on corn silks, clipping them off. They feed their way into the ear, where they remain until they exit to pupate in the soil. So you can see the pictures there of them, in that corn ear there. Threshold for these guys, it's the presence of 5 to 10 adults per trap. What that trap means, you can buy pheromone and nightlight traps. to catch, and this is presence of 5 to 10 adults. If you don't have a pheromone, a nightlight trap, you know, that's the threshold. I'm not sure what you could do otherwise, except for go out and look for the larva, but there currently is no threshold based on the larva. The next one is your true armyworm. The larvae are greenish brown in color with several longitudinal stripes. So that top picture there, you can see that tan stripe running towards the top and a little lower down by the legs. They have dark bands on the abdominal prolegs. So those prolegs are those 4 legs in the middle back of it with the kind of V-shaped black marking on it. And then the head has a distinct dark pattern. So you can kind of see it in the picture here, but it has a mottled dark or black and brown mottled appearance on its head. In the spring, swarms of adults fly northward and deposit eggs on green plants. And then the adults there are grayish-white in color. Again, they look very similar to, you know, your other Lepidoptera pests. Damaged newly hatched armyworms feed in colonies and skeletonized leaves. Skeletonized means they just, you know, kind of chew randomly, avoiding a lot of the thicker veins within the leaf. Larvae that are half grown or more will feed singly on leaves, in the ear, on the tassels, and then damage resembles that caused by corn earworm. So it will look similar. Now that picture in the top right, you can see an example of that shot hole injury, where you have those holes appearing in a straight line across the leaf. Threshold for these guys from VE to V6. If you go out into your field and 10% of, or if you average 10% defoliation of your corn plants and the larvae are less than 0.75 inches long, you might want to think about treating. And then later on, the corn plants are larger, they can tolerate more injury. From V7 to V8, 25% average injury, and larvae are less than 0.75% long. The length of the larva is very important because if they are longer than 0.75 inches, that means they're already past their most damaging instar. So if they are longer than that, they've already done most of the damage they will do, and there's no point in managing them. So our last group of Lepidoptera is your cutworms. Here's a picture of cutworm larva. Damage of these guys. Most larvae are active voracious feeders at night, so they are a nocturnal feeder. So if you want to find them, the actual larvae, you probably will have to go at night with a flashlight. Many stay on the ground, cutting seedling house plants off or just below the soil surface. That's a very general statement, as you'll see in some of the cutworms that I'll cover. They do cause different types of damage, but cutworms overall will cut really close to the soil surface. Threshold for cutworm damage is if 5% of your seedlings show damage, so if they're cut or defoliated. And then again, if the larvae are less than an inch long. If they're longer than that, then you've already pretty much got all the damage you'll get, and those larvae will move on. So our first one is variegated cutworm. Again, the adult looks pretty similar to all your other corn pests. The forewings of the adult are yellow or brown with pale mottled design speckled, with a dark brown spot on the upper edge of each forewing. That dark spot, I don't know if my mouse shows up, but it's towards the middle of that wing, kind of looks like a bean shape. You can kind of see it on every picture. The hind wings are white with brown veins and margins, and again, most of these moths have those white hind wings. So larva is gray to blackish with an orange stripe on each side of a cylindrical body, and a W-shaped black marking is present on the tip of the abdomen. You might be able to see it's a very loose W shape on the far right picture. On the right side of that picture, there's kind of a W-shaped dark marking there, and a line of small yellow dots at the very top. So if you look on the left picture, you can see those yellow dots right at the very top of that caterpillar. So here's kind of a close-up of it. The head with a dark brown net-like pattern with dark stripes. So you can kind of see those dark stripes. There's the yellow dots at the very top of it. And then it kind of has that mottled appearance. So damage, The variegated cutworm is one of the few cutworms that climbs up the plant to feed. So you can see here, instead of cutting that plant right at the soil surface, it did go up a couple inches. Later emerging larvae, the variegated cutworm, occasionally when corn is silking, will be found feeding on those silks at the tip of the ear. Our next cutworm is your dingy cutworm. So there's a picture of the larva and the adult. The larvae are a dull pale gray to reddish brown with a broad gray dorsal stripe. So if you look in that bottom left picture, you can see that light brown stripe that runs all the way across the top there. Subdivided in V-shaped areas on each side. You really can't see that in this picture, but this dingy cutworm is very similar in appearance to black cutworm. We won't be covering the black cutworm here, but in most cases, it'll be the dingy cutworm in your corn. They differ from the black cutworm in that they have 4 black warts or spots on each abdominal segment that are equal in diameter. So this picture, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but in that light tan stripe that runs across the back, you can kind of make out 4 little black dots on each segment. Each segment is kind of where it sticks out on each side. That's a abdominal segment. If you can't ID it, again, like I said earlier, just take a picture of the insect and send it to Adam, or collect one and send that to Adam as well. Pack it well, because we've got samples of insects that were not packed well and were smashed. And of course, that's very hard to ID that. The adult is pretty distinct. It is gray with distinct whitish gray markings on each forewing. The forewing is the one that's really colorful. The hind wing are, again, just white, just like a lot of them, grayish brown with white fringe. Damage or dingy cutworm, again, they differ from most cutworms in that they climb up and feed almost entirely on the leaf, especially on the end. So you can see here's a corn plant that got fed on by a dingy cutworm. Despite their name, they seldom cut your corn plant. They cause less damage than black cutworms, which may feed on the leaves and cut the stems. So that is a distinguishing feature of them. I do have to mention, we have had, if you do have a lot of deer near your cornfield, we've had it where we thought we had cutworms, but it was actually deer. And the reason we could distinguish from it is that a cutworm will cut the plant, and then of course the section that was cut off will still be there. And of course, with the deer, they'll eat it, and it will be, you'll see the cut plant, but the rest of it will be gone because they ate it. So our very last insect is a western bean cutworm. Yeah, I'm running out of time here. The western bean cutworm adult is a typical cutworm moth, which flies at night and is attracted to light, so you won't see them unless you're there at night. The forewings are brown with distinct brown kidney-shaped markings, so that will be that kidney bean kind of shape with a light tan stripe on the leading edge of the forewing. You can see that on each side there. Small western bean cutworms are similar to young armyworms. These two species are difficult to separate until further examination, and you could apply that to a lot of these insects, caterpillar pests here. They have faint diamond-shaped markings on their back. So as you see on the right picture there, they have the dark brown, but then you kind of have that tannish orange running right at the top of the insect there. Damage of them, the western bean cutworm is primarily a pest of field beans, but is occasionally injurious to corn, to your maize. The larvae may proceed to the unfolding whorl, where they will feed on parts of the emergent tassel and move directly to the ear or leaf axil. So this is one you want to look at later on in the season. Your other cutworms, they appear more early on in the season. They'll cut your seedlings. This one's later on. So with that, I'm Philip Rozeboom, the IPM coordinator. There's my phone number. Most cases during the summertime, I won't be in my office, so I probably won't answer. But if you have any questions for me at any time, shoot me an email at philip.rozeboom@sdstate.edu. And then also, Adam Varanor, he's our entomology specialist, our state entomology specialist, my boss. If you have any insect-related questions, you know, he's the one to ask. He'll give you some really good answers. There's his office number as well as his email there. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Philip. We've got a short poll that's going to pop up here that we want you to answer a couple of questions. And if you'll do that, in the meantime, we've got one quick question here for you, Philip. Are you seeing more extended diapause in South Dakota?
I haven't heard really anything, but I know that'd be a great question for Bradley McManus or Adam. I know they would probably know about that. I guess I'm not entirely sure. I haven't heard that we have been seeing more, but Brad might give you a different answer.
Next on the program, we have Emmanuel going to speak to us. Emmanuel, I just have problems saying your last name all the time, and so I'm not going to butcher it. Emmanuel's been with us since 2013 and is moving up through the system, already has made an associate professor, and has been real good and has received several extension awards from groups and through the university. And without further ado, Emmanuel, take us away.
Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I hope you can see my slides, and I also hope you can hear me okay. In the chat, if you don't mind, I have a short question. I'm just curious, what diseases on corn are you seeing in your area? So if you don't mind, you can type so that question in the chat, and so we can have an idea what you're seeing. But this morning, I thought I would highlight some of the new diseases we're seeing, and some that are in the region. And then I will end looking at some of the fungicides we tried out. So if fungicide efficacy results for 2020. And so with that, it seems I don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to go through quickly in the presentation, so bear with me. So one of the newest diseases we're seeing on corn is called bacterial leaf streak of corn. This disease is quite different from bacterial leaf streak on wheat. I'll explain that in a bit, but this is a new disease that was found in Nebraska in 2016. And in fact, the way they found this disease is that they had applied a fungicide in a cornfield and nothing was happening. They just kept seeing the same symptoms advancing. And so when they took the sample to the clinic, long and behold, it was a bacterial disease. So first found in Nebraska in 2016, then here in South Dakota, it was 2018. And so far we found it in 4 counties. This disease has also been found in neighboring states, like Minnesota, Iowa, of course, first found in Nebraska, but hasn't been found yet in North Dakota. And in South Dakota, where we found it, there's only one field where it was pretty severe. This was corn on corn, and it was irrigated corn. So it had really bad symptoms of this disease. But for the other counties where we found it, the symptoms are quite light and not as heavy, especially if it is not irrigated corn or corn on corn. So as I mentioned, bacterial leaf streak, of course, is caused by bacterial disease, pathogen. The name of the bacteria is Xanthomonas versicolor pathoversiculorum. We shorten it as XVV. This bacteria has been shown to survive on crop residue because some of the volunteer corn has been found with this disease. So definitely it can survive on a crop residue. There has been some studies done to see if it can be transmitted by seed, but actually we haven't really confirmed that the bacteria can survive on seed and then cause disease. The bacteria, as other bacterial diseases, is going to infect corn through natural openings. So unlike fungal pathogens, the bacteria is not able to create a wound or a lesion and then enter through that, but it does go through natural openings and injury that happens on the corn's surface. And so that's how the bacteria will enter the plant. Looking at how the disease develops, it seems that it is favored by high humidity and moisture. So those are the conditions that you see this disease develop on corn. And again, where you have continuous corn, irrigated corn, and where you have high residue situation, you can have this bacteria develop in corn and cause the bacterial leaf streak. So what else should you know? As far as symptoms go, of course, that's really important. As I mentioned, they were applying a fungicide, not knowing that a bacterial disease. So diagnosing the disease is pretty important. So if you're looking at the symptoms, the most characteristic symptoms are going to be these narrow, long brown, light brown lesions. That's how the disease starts. And actually, when it's just starting, it's easy to note, observe it or notice it. But as time goes on, these lesions are going to expand, and then they will have a wavy margin. So you can see the progression of symptoms on the plant. You can see how these are becoming longer and wider. And then over time, this is what you end up with, really levels that can cause yield loss, especially under conditions that I mentioned before. So if you look at a leaf that has bacterial leaf streak and you hold it against the light, this is what you're going to see. These margins are going to be more distinct and they kind of look yellow. So that's how you know you have bacterial leaf streak, and you can't confuse it with other diseases like gray leaf spot. So yeah, the wavy margin, and of course, bacterial diseases are going to have that wetness look in the lesion, and that's when you know you have bacterial leaf streak of corn. It seems this bacterial disease is not systemic. So we know some other bacterial diseases like gaseous wilt can be systemic, but this bacterial leaf streak has not been shown to be systemic. In other words, it doesn't grow and transmit throughout the plant. Just the infected parts of the plant are the ones that show the symptoms. When it comes to diagnosis, again, the point I wanted to make here is make sure you don't confuse bacterial leaf streak with other diseases, especially gray leaf spot. You can see that the symptoms kind of look pretty close, except that for gray leaf spot, you have these kind of regular rectangular lesions on the leaves, and they also don't have any distinct margin, especially that is wavy. So that's the characteristic we use. But on the outlook, these two diseases can look a little bit similar, especially if gray leaf spot is severe and where the lesions have expanded. But again, make sure you're looking for that wavy margin, and also some type of a wetness towards the edge of the lesion. That will be because of bacterial leaf streak and not gray leaf spot. And of course, the lesions are going to be much longer for the bacterial leaf streak. And for gray leaf spot, they usually tend to be interrupted between the veins and they are shorter. So that's how you distinguish between the gray leaf spot, which is a fungal disease, which we can manage using fungicides, compared to the bacterial leaf streak, where fungicides won't be used for. So looking at management of bacterial leaf streak in corn, I mentioned that yield loss can be severe, especially where you have corn on corn, irrigated corn. But for the most part, we haven't seen this disease to be so severe to worry about yield loss. So if we do a few things, especially where we have a field that has been confirmed to have the bacteria, we need to do a few things to help with reducing the impact of the disease. So crop rotation, of course, this is one thing we would recommend. Since the bacteria can survive on corn residue, when you rotate, the bacteria population over time will go down. So tillage, where practical, of course, considering conservation of moisture and soil, or at least baling off the stalks so you reduce that inoculum load can also help. Unfortunately, we don't have resistance yet in corn hybrids, but a lot of companies are aware of this disease and they are now selecting hybrids that are tolerant to the disease. But so far, only cultural practices can help with managing this disease. So next, then we're going to look at a new disease in the region, but is not yet confirmed in South Dakota. This disease is called tar spot. It's a fungal disease, and it was first found in 2015 in the I-states. So that this would be Illinois and Indiana. That's where it was first found. But actually, it has been occurring in South America for a longer period of time. And you can see on this map that the two neighbors of ours are already showing this disease, but actually more to the east side of these two states. So it could be a matter of time that we'll see tar spot in South Dakota. But so far, we have finding actually from the Corn Council, and last year in 2020, we did a lot of sampling, but we did not find tar spot, especially in the areas neighboring these two states. That's where we concentrated. So if you find tar spot in your area, please let us know so we can confirm it and let everybody be aware of this disease. So this disease, unlike the bacterial leaf streak, it can be pretty severe and it can cause significant yield loss. So you can see this picture from Michigan, how this field was really looking severely infected and the leaves were dying prematurely. And in some of these fields, they are finding over 30 bushels per acre lost because of tar spot. So it's a bad disease and it can really take off quickly and it can impact yield. So it's a fungal disease and it's caused by this fungus called Coleoptera. They have shown that this fungus can survive on stubble. Some of the initial studies done at Iowa State where they just put it in a residue and left it in the field, came back next year and the pathogen was still surviving. So preliminary data shows that it can survive on corn stubble. And looking at when this disease develops, which is a bit later in the season, it seems like it's favored by warmer temperatures. And of course, moisture is going to be a factor as well for most of the fungal diseases. And so that's a few things we know about this disease. If it develops early in the season, then yield, of course, is going to be heavily impacted. But if it develops a bit late in the season, then we won't have as much disease impact. But that's what we know about this disease so far. And when it comes to symptoms, how do you know you have tar spot and not any other symptom, any other disease? When you look at the leaf that has tar spot, it's going to have these black tar-like symptoms, and they're pretty resistant to be scraped off. So that's one thing we use to tell that we have tar spot. So if you use your thumb and try to scrape off these tar markings on the leaf, they won't go off easily. As we shall see for the other diseases, that's not the case. Also, some of these lesions can have what is called a fish eye. This is where you have this kind of tan, light whitish lesion, and in the center you have this lesion, this black tar. That is also a typical symptom of tar spot in corn. So again, if you're wondering if you have tar spot, try to scrape off the tar on the lesion. For tar spot, it's not going to come out easily. So as I mentioned, tar spot can be confused with other diseases, especially rust pathogens that are going into pterospore form or overwintering version of the fungus, as seen here in this picture. But the distinction is going to be for rusts, the pustules are easily dislodged and you can easily scrape them off, unlike tar spot, where they're really firm into the tissue. So, but as you can see, it can look pretty close to tar spot. The other disease that we're likely to confuse tar spot with is physodermal leaf blight, as seen here in this picture. But of course, these don't have the black markings, and yeah, there's nothing to scrape off. So if you see these little yellow concentrated spots on the leaves, especially in the center of the leaf, that likely is not going to be tar spot, but physoderma. So these are the two diseases that I wanted us to be aware of. Tar spot, not yet in South Dakota, but based on where it is found now, it might as well be here, but maybe we haven't found it. We haven't hit the right fields. And of course, bacterial leaf streak is already here. So don't confuse these two diseases, especially bacterial leaf streak, which is already here. If you apply a fungicide, it won't be helpful. So I'd like to pause here and, before I go there, when it comes to management for TerraSport, fungicides have been shown to be effective. So I have here a slide that was shared with me from Illinois, from Nathan, and they tried a bunch of various fungicides and looked at TerraSport severity after 41 days of applying the fungicide. And you can see a lot of these fungicides really kept the disease low after 41 days. Of course, after 49 days, you know, the fungicide is wearing off. So that's why we see some of these having higher disease severity. But really bottom line is that the fungicide will help. So that's a good thing that with TerraSport, if it ever comes, then we'll do fungicide efficacy here. But so far in other states, they're finding fungicides to be effective. All right, so the last disease I'll mention as an emerging disease is southern rust. So southern rust has been observed in South Dakota in the last 5 years, but actually it's 2020 that we saw severe levels than we have seen in the past. So it's kind of like an emerging disease because, you know, 1 year is on, another year is off, but it's something we need to watch. And so southern rust, like other rust, doesn't survive in South Dakota, so spores are blown in, and we tend to see it a bit later in the season. And one thing that people always ask is, do I have southern rust or do I have common rust? So here I wanted to provide a distinction between the two rusts. So for common rust, which is pretty common everywhere you go, any field, I can almost guarantee you're gonna find a common rust. The spores are a bit dark red and they tend to be like randomly distributed on a corn leaf. You're also likely to find these at the edges of the field or field entrances, you know, where leaves are more exposed. In the middle of the field red, you find common rust. Southern rust is a little almost opposite. First of all, the spores tend to be, or pustules tend to develop in a clustered pattern, and then the color also is different. So the southern rust tends to be a bit on the orange yellowish side, and then the common rust is towards being dark red. So that's how you tell the difference between the two rusts. And common rust can be anywhere in the field. It can, you know, infect a lot of plants and cause, you know, severe levels, as you can see here. So these are pictures all from last year here in South Dakota. In fact, this was somewhere near Frondro. So this field had a lot of southern rust. Now, when it comes to managing southern rust, it's a matter of scouting, keeping an eye on the radar to see if southern rust is in the region. We do have a tracking tool where you can log on and subscribe and you get updates on southern rust, but it can be severe and it can cause seed loss. So here, I'm gonna pause and take a quick poll just to gauge how you have used fungicides on corn. So if you don't mind, please respond. Do you see enough disease pressure in corn to warrant applying a fungicide? So the next few slides, we're going to talk quickly about fungicide efficacy, but also looking at what diseases are we applying fungicides to control. So I'll wait for a few more responses. Almost half of you have already responded, so. Okay, so based on what I'm seeing already here in the poll, it seems like more than 90% of you are saying that this is false, that you don't see enough disease pressure in corn to require a fungicide. And this is in agreement with what I'm going to share with you, because in our small plot research, in my scouting, we don't see a lot of disease pressure in corn to warrant using a fungicide. So that's great. That's just there we agree. So, so when we think of applying a fungicide, first of all, what are the diseases we're thinking of controlling in corn? So, of course, we know northern cornleaf blight. We know this disease by looking at the lesion. So the cigar-shaped lesion, that would tell you that you have northern cornleaf blight. If the lesion has freckles or water soaking, that wouldn't be northern corn leaf blight, rather that would be gases. And I think most of us are pretty good at telling what gases looks like. Second disease here, I already mentioned, gray leaf spot. We do have common rust, which is usually a very minor disease, appears on the edges of the field or field entrances. And also, by the time you see this kind of common rust, it's going to be actually way late in the season. So not a disease we worry about. Eye spot. So eye spot is a fungal disease also that we can use fungicides to control, but usually also develops on the lower leaves and usually is never a major disease. So just like most of you have said, we don't see a lot of disease pressure in corn in South Dakota to require a fungicide. But other instances where we may use a fungicide, yes. If you have corn on corn, irrigated corn, high residue corn, you may see more diseases develop, especially in the southern east part of the state. In some of those fields I've scouted, I've found quite high levels of disease that perhaps would require a fungicide. But looking at our results last year of a number of fungicides that were applied at R1 and also R3, what we're really finding is that we don't see really a big benefit of using fungicides on corn, and pretty much because of disease pressure, as some of you have mentioned. We don't see enough disease pressure that would require applying a fungicide and therefore getting that fungicide benefit. Even when you apply it a little late, so at R3, still, yes, some improvement, you're getting significant yield difference compared to untreated, but again, not as high that would be necessary or would pay for itself. Maybe now that prices are picking up, perhaps. But since we don't have a lot of disease pressure to require a fungicide, it would be a good practice not necessarily to apply a fungicide when it's not needed, because you may not get that return on your investment. But if you should apply a fungicide, then some things to consider. Of course, look at the disease severity. It tends to be low, but do scouting and find out if you have a lot of disease to require fungicide. The best timing, based on what we're finding and other people in the region, would be R1 or tasseling. Some people, are talking of V5, V6 in corn, so quite early, and you won't see any disease that requires a fungicide that early in the season. And then for late planted or late maturing hybrids, one disease to think about for applying a fungicide would be southern rust, as I already mentioned. So in summary, and looking at all these diseases we've mentioned, number one, scout and diagnose accurately. Are you applying a fungicide because you have a fungal disease, or could you be having a bacterial disease like bacterial leaf streak, and then that fungicide won't be beneficial? Residue management is important. Other than rust, as we have seen, most of these diseases are going to survive on the residue. So when you do longer rotations, at least more than 2 years, so that all that residue breaks down and the inoculum is reduced, that can be really helpful in controlling the disease. And then finally, if you have to apply a fungicide, perhaps look at later growth stages. V5, V6, V7 is too early for South Dakota to see any disease. And by the time the diseases show up, which would be after tasseling or R1, this fungicide would have worn off. So some of these points for you to consider as we go through 2021 growing season. So that's what I had this morning to share with you. Because of time, I think we can have a few minutes for questions, if any, but that's what I had. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have a great growing season 2021.
If you have any questions out there, please put them in the question and answer place now, and we can ask Emmanuel on that. In the meantime, we have another short poll for you to take, and if you would take that for us.
I just wanted to add, I think Phil mentioned something to do with the Aphid virus transmission. So yeah, aphids are famous for transmitting a number of plant viruses, but actually in corn, I have not come across any of the viruses that are transmitted by aphids, or even leaf hoppers or whiteflies for that matter. The only virus I've seen in corn is called brown mosaic virus. but this is transmitted by nematodes in the soil. So it tends to be really very limited, since nematodes are not very mobile in soil. So that's disease that is a viral disease that I've come across in corn. But for the most part, aphids here in South Dakota are not transmitting any of the viruses we know.
Well, thanks, Emmanuel. Also in the chat, I put the information for you to be able to join a Zoom meeting afterwards here that we can visit more on one-on-one, and you'll be able to just use your voice on that. I believe we have a couple of questions in the questions and answer, Emmanuel.
Yeah, sure. So yep, I see one question here. Does raw width affect disease pressure, wide versus narrow? So in corn, not so much, because where they have less than 30-inch row spacing in corn, you really have these leaves that join together and form a good canopy. And so we haven't seen disease pressure increase in corn because of row spacing. However, that is different for soybean. One disease, white mold, is really favored by narrow row spacing. So spacing is more of a factor in soybean and not necessarily in corn. And then there's another question. Somebody's asking, Daniel's asking, that can we have yield increase without the presence of disease? So there's a class of fungicides called the strawberries, or the QOI, group 11 fungicides, and these have been shown to have additional benefits. They promote the good physiological aspects of the plant, and sometimes may have a bump in yield because of applying a strobe in corn. However, we have done some studies actually when I was at Iowa State, and it doesn't matter how long the crop stays green, as long as the corn has reached RO6, or black layer. So once it has reached black layer, then no assimilates can go in the seed, and therefore that won't be helpful in terms of increasing yield. So it wouldn't be a good practice to apply fungicides to increase yield. Fungicides should be used to control fungal diseases. So that would be my recommendation. And then somebody is asking, Daniel is asking, have you seen this in your trial? I'm not sure what was attributed to, but yeah, unless I've missed something. But if you're asking for the diseases I mentioned, we have seen bacterial leaf streak in corn, but we haven't seen tar spot in South Dakota yet. So that is the answer I may have on that, unless you want to clarify what you meant by have you seen this in your trial. And then another question is about tillage. Is an answer to control one of the diseases that you mentioned. How does that play into minimum till or no till programs without disrupting the benefits of tillage practices? So as I mentioned, tillage can only be done where it is practical, in areas, for example, where there's excessive moisture, so you have to open up that soil to improve on the drainage. But I'm aware of, the benefits of no-till or minimum till. And so that becomes kind of a conundrum where you have a disease and then you're leaving residue on the field. So in those instances, then you have to rely on other methods, and perhaps that's where a fungicide would be recommended.
Okay, again, back to the chat. There was a comment in there, and it says Goss GLS.
Yes, so I think he was responding to the question I had in the chat, what diseases are being seen in the area, and I think he mentioned the gusses and the gray leaf spot. So yeah, thanks for saying that, and pretty much that's what we see for diseases in corn. So gray leaf spot, gusses wilt, and northern corn leaf blight.
Another question, was the first CEU code shared? Yes, it was at the end of the presentation.
Okay, and Paul, do you have the one for this session?
Okay, and Sarah would Do you want to come on? Yeah, we've already headed up, Emmanuel.
Okay.
And while you were visiting there.
All right. Okay. Sounds good.
Sarah would like to come on. Matt, can she
Connie, I think you're talking about, right?
oh, okay. Connie, do you have a few comments? We're kind of running over here a little bit, but maybe some quick ones.
I was just going to mention quick about the question that was brought up yesterday with hail in corn and whether or not applying a fungicide is needed. With hail, the diseases that are attributed to hail or wounding, if you will, are more of bacterial in nature. So a fungicide would not be effective to be applying unless you were having a significant disease pressure before that hail event occurred. So if you were seeing those fungal diseases beforehand, then in theory that fungicide could still be warranted, but hail on its own wouldn't necessitate a fungicide response.
Okay. Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up. And so if you go over to the chat, you should be able to move over to our Zoom link, and we will have discussion there. I think Matt will stay on a little bit longer, and if any of you got any questions, and the rest of us will move over to the Zoom chat.